But today we're talking about C# 11. What is C# 11? Well, it's the latest version of C#. You can use it in .NET 7. You can also switch a language switch in the project config file to use it in older versions as well to get some of those new language features. What is it all about? Again, improved developer productivity, and that includes things like better string handling. There's a lot of stuff we do in strings these days, so that's kind of nice and welcome. Object initialization has been improved, making it easier to create objects, which is important in bigger picture items like returning JSON data from services and not having to write a lot of code for that. There's also a lot of under the hood stuff, generic math support, the ability to create generics and still automatically get everything that you would get from math operations, like the ability to create a type of T that then supports things like multiplication and so on. And of course, runtime performance stuff. These two items is probably not something that you will encounter all that much yourself in terms of the code you write, but it just means more stuff works and more stuff works better. And a lot of those features are kind of hidden and have really been requested by the .NET runtime team. But improved developer productivity, things like object initialization are gonna be the ones that you see every day. So things like raw string literals, new lines and strings. In fact, what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna bring up my Visual Studio, and I'm just gonna show you some of that stuff real quick. So what we'll do is we'll go into Visual Studio here, we'll create a new console app, because that's the simplest thing to test, and give it some default name, which is fine. We're going after .NET 7, still the preview for a few days here, and we'll go ahead and create that. And it should be done in a moment. And here is our .NET 7 C# app. If you haven't done .NET in a while, you may not be aware of this, but we now have this feature of top-level files and simplified code, so we can actually just start writing some code like this without wrapping it into a main or into a function or method or anything like that. The compiler does that for us now. And so this would just work. But what I want to show you is a feature called raw string literals. And what this is, it's actually kind of neat. It allows me to do something like this, where I can say I want to create a message. And then I'm going to start this message with 3 quotation signs. And what this does is it allows me to create literal strings that have all kinds of stuff in it. So I could say, hello world, state of .NET is cool. And you notice that I'm putting quotes inside of that. And it understands that that's just part of my string. I don't have to escape that because I started with 3 string literals. Now people say, well, what if I want to use 3 quotes in here? Well, that would end the string literal, but I could actually make 4 double quotes around this and end with 4 double quotes. And then it will consider this part here to just be part of that string. I can also do things like indent stuff. And if I then go and say console.write of that string, and I go ahead and run this, it's gonna pop up on my wrong screen, I think. Here it is. You'll see that it actually created this string, and it created it kind of like we probably wanted it, right? So even though this is indented here, it doesn't add those spaces and instead assumes that this is where it started. And why does it do that? It's actually driven by the end of this. So depending on how far I indent the end of this string here is what it will do with the spacing. So because I just moved this back out, it now considers this white space part of the string and now indented that. So in a way, it's kind of like, oh, it's a stupid string feature, but it's actually very nicely done, right? So I can, you know, have longer messages like this. Let's move this into my cheat sheet here. Oops. Right, so long messages like that. And then what I can do is I can actually start embedding string interpolation into this. So let's say I did something like this here, where I had my my text string with embedded expressions. And I can now use this new syntax. So I can say, I want to start with $2. And that means that my expressions also are within 2 open and close curly brackets. And what this would then do is it would write this text, and the text actually includes a single curly as just text, but then these double ones are being interpreted as the expressions that we are embedding. And if I wanted to embed dual ones, I could do another one, and now it would always be 3 and so on. You get the idea. Another thing that's kind of cool is we can do something like this here, copying from my cheat sheet again. In this case, we have a message and we are embedding these expressions here. And I have an expression that supports new lines within the expression. So I, for whatever reason, felt that it would be better to break this across 2 lines. And that just works. So again, once I run this, here is what we get. And the output of this is, first of all, we have the curly brackets in there. But it's just a single line, even though I wrap this across 2 lines. Now you're going to say, hey, Marcus, what are you doing? This looks horrible. Well, this actually makes sense when you have something that's a bit more like this. All right, so in this case, we have a message, and the message has an embedded expression, which is a variable that's not defined here. Let's do that maybe. Okay, so now we have this expression in here. And then I want to do essentially a switch statement on this and do some pattern matching. Well, a switch statement on 1 line looks horrible. But in this case, I can just break this message over multiple lines and have very, very natural syntax. And note that it understands that this next quote is within the expressions. It doesn't consider it an ended expression. And so now when we run this, we get the output that we would actually expect on a single line, but we can very nicely do complex expressions within string interpolation inside of these raw strings. So very, very nice stuff. Also works really, really well with link expressions that we want to embed. And that's all part of this overall idea that if we generate a lot of strings, which in a JSON-driven world is very likely, then we can, in a single line or single expression, embed very, very complex things and still handle them nicely. So that's one example of C#11 developer productivity. Question online is, are there differences in using basically the old syntax with @ $sign and so on? No, that's still always, that's supported as is, no breaking changes, but also nothing new. It's just a multiple quotation that have changed. Okay, other things that are supported is things like UTF-8 strings. If you need to create a string that's UTF-8, you could actually do something like this. We could say that would be a regular string the way we have had it. And if I need a UTF-8 encoded, I could just do that, which would be kind of cool. Just add U8 at the end. So lots and lots of little things like that. Better pattern matching. That's also internal things now like span of char and read-only span of char, which is a productivity feature, a performance feature. So that's kind of cool. Just works. It's always there if you're interested in that. So that's cool. Now, another thing that's worth mentioning is object initialization. Let's say I have a class like this, a person class that has a first and a last name. And when somebody uses that class, I want them to initialize that to something. Well, in the past, we couldn't force that, right? So if then the object was created and those fields were empty because nobody initialized them, there was no way for me as the designer of that class to express the intent that I need you to initialize those fields to something. We can now do that by adding the required keyword here. And there's also ways to say this goes through the constructor and then satisfies that criteria. So those are just nice little features like that that make it easier to create good code and prevent common